I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. In these troubled times, did you ever wonder what would you do if you just got away from the business as usual world? Where would you go to escape the madness and connect with the earth? Let's ask that of our guest today, Denada. Hey there, this is Dean Walker with the Poetry of Predicament podcast. I wanted to just give you a little bit of an introduction to this particular episode. We'll be talking today with a woman named Denada, who spends part of each year in Fiji and the other part of the year in Canada. And, what really drew me to want to do this interview was to finally talk to somebody who has quite artfully and intentionally and on a fairly low budget gotten herself out of the business as usual rat race. She also has, she's a person of a certain age, and she's spent a number of decades really refining her own body of work, her own way of seeing and framing the world. And so she's going to share a little bit of that, a little bit of the body of work that she's come up with, including her creative work, artwork and poetry. And we'll be able to see for a few moments her home in Fiji. But I'm particularly enchanted by hearing how she's put together this particular life for herself. It seems within reach for some number of people. It's not a lavish lifestyle by any stretch. But I just thought it would be refreshing to actually talk with somebody who's made it happen, who's really stepped outside of the box, so to speak. So I hope you'll enjoy this conversation with a rather unique and very, very creative person, Denada.
When the builders all arrive. But I didn't realize you were connected to poetry.
Well, only vaguely. I have a tremendous and long-standing interest in it, being inspired by it. I've written a bit, and I have just taken the liberty of calling my podcast the Poetry of Predicament, because the main focus of my work in my website and my book of a couple of years ago called The Impossible Conversation, and a website full of things that are meant to be of support to people who are aware of the human-caused collapse of Earth and human systems that's going on. Mm-hmm. And I am prone to calling that a predicament that we're in. And we've gotten ourselves into this predicament. And my intention in doing the interviews that I do is to ask of people who have something to say, ask them, what are the ways that we can best prepare ourselves, inner preparations for the most part, to be able to face these predicaments and these challenges in a good way?
Well, first, I happen to believe, knowing that I made or aim to perhaps drop all my beliefs before I pass over, is that when we call it carry the light, when we expand our energy, when we connect with the pure essence of ourselves and our creator, we are uplifting humanity. Mm-hmm. So the more we get to know the truth of who we are, own inner nature, the more we can relate to Mother Earth and treat her as loving children,
Mhm.
appreciating the abundance she gives us, the support, um, meets our needs. We don't, as en masse as humans, in my opinion, really, really appreciate and love her to the extent that she loves us.
Mhm.
So everything is energy, and what combines that energy, in my opinion, is space, love, expansion, compassion, understanding, awareness,
Mhm.
the life force.
Well, it's interesting that you've been mentioning that how you found out about my work and made this connection that that we're speaking now, made that connection through Sheila Winter Wallace, who is a course leader and kind of a holder of the flame, if you will, for a body of work that's sometimes called WELL Systems, WEL. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten what that stands for at the moment, but it's the work that was started by um, Louise Lebrun a number of years back. And I've had the really distinct pleasure of connecting with Louise and with Sheila and a number of women who have both participated and now to some degree or another are involved with leading the work or integrating it into their own practices and so on. And so I'm hearing you say that you've had some amount of connection with Sheila. Perhaps it's in that work as well?
No, Sheila and I came together. I happen to be the founding president of what is called the Women's Business Network in Ottawa.
Uh-huh.
Um, and that's still going 36 years later. So I could take a few, accolades about that. But I have actually come along a separate path. I've come along an individual path in the healing world. I consider myself a wounded healer, but a wounded shamanic healer. It's been my discovery that the majority of shamans have come through trauma, and in dealing with the challenges of being traumatically impacted while on Earth, that they have gone to a deeper level than the majority and found the gifts that lie within trauma, injury, disease, etc. And that we truly are our own best teachers, and that our maker, creator, has given us the power to heal ourselves.
Got it. Okay. So it sounds like you've ended up crafting a life for yourself that is it seems to ride the wave of earlier experience for you that involves some amount of trauma, and it sounds like some amount of energetic awareness that, if I'm hearing you right, ended up cultivating an interest and an expression artistically,
Yes.
and also one that involves healing both yourself and others. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I do. At the moment, my husband passed 3 years ago, and so I'm working through that, but I'm also an author. I have written a book called Twisted Roots Standing Tall, but I'm more interested in conveying the importance, the value, the incredible abilities we have to understand energy, that everything is made up of energy, and within the space of energy, what makes everything exist, that is the life force, but more easily defined for me is a loving force.
Mhm.
And that if people would find the space and time, if their hearts so desire it so deeply as I did, I came to this work through pain, um, just using my own experiences to express the depth at which an individual can go. We can go back to the experience or relive the energy of our conception, which is what I did. And then everything, well, not everything, but a lot of experiences since that. Um, it's a great gift to be able to connect with ourselves and in touch on the eternal part of ourselves, um, in an unseen world. That's how I would describe it. And
So
the
it
power,
sounds, mhm, please.
and the power, the finest energy, in my opinion, I can be wrong, is that the finer the energy, the more powerful the energy. And I don't mean the power that the people who control the world today or are attempting to. I don't mean that kind of power. I mean a total different power. We have the ability, all is potential in this world we live in, and all is possible. I mean, the power that works in that arena.
Mhm. What I'm noticing as I look back in the path, the progression of email communications and so on between us that got us to here to this conversation today. And I heard this last piece that you're describing in particular. You're articulating a particular quality of power, a particular and quite unique definition of power, and how that shows up in your experience, in your direct experience of being alive. It seems like that's infused in each of the aspects of your life that you're describing, your artistic ventures, your healing ventures, your relationships. I'm curious if you have a sense of a core message that's important that you would like to be heard for.
I think the core message would be each individual is their own best teacher.
Mhm.
This is what I discovered. If people were to look back and see the things that they have accomplished or come to integrate into helping them identify themselves, they might discover that it was brought with some frustration, some difficulties, but it also created the most powerful moments of their life. And it's like that experience is just a second away at any time in their life. They never forget it. And the other thing, that when they understand that they and only them can love themselves to the greatest depth that is possible in this world, is because no one else can know them to the intricacies, the obstacles, the joys, the beauty, to the depth that they have that ability. And for me, that is understanding, or moving towards understanding self-love.
Very clear. I appreciate you saying that. And I'm curious, and can you can you share a bit of what you see out in the world now that that doesn't quite reach that mark? I mean, obviously, we're in a troubled world from my perspective, deeply troubled, as at a level that we've never seen before, that human beings have never had to grapple with before. And I'm curious if you would mind sharing what you see when you look out in the world, and how do you compare that or contrast that with what you were just describing in a more ideal state?
Well, the phrase that often comes to mind is man's inhumanity to man. And I think that's what we're seeing in man's inhumanity to Mother Earth. And it has taken me many years. I had my first trauma when I was 18 months. It was horrific, so much so that I was able to, I chose to want to commit suicide at an 18-month-old baby. And I found that out through the depth of energy work. But what I'm trying to say is, at that point, I used whatever I could to push the life force out to destroy life. And the depth of our ability to destroy has a pendulum that swings towards the depth of our ability to love. We happen to have been what they call in a dual world. And so I see humanity as experiencing what not to do in a great depth. Wars within countries, in nationalities, are actually wars within people's hearts. Like energy gravitates to like energy. We are doing a lot of internal damage that creates these incredible, horrific experiences, mercenaries, war-torn rape and pillage. But the opposite is where we are moving, hopefully, towards. I mean, there's like 20 families that control the world, but they are losing their power. And the masses, I've always been strongly interested in what I call the blue masses. Because the people who work in corporations, more often than not, the companies have a vested interest in educating their employees. But the blue masses are not as easily exposed to education. And education is controlled. So the only salvation is to go inside. That's what I discovered. And I had 20 years of trauma, my first 20 years, and I had nowhere to go but to go inside. So all these horrific acts that we're seeing eventually will lead an individual to go inside. Mm-hmm. He was born with a conscience. Mm-hmm. It takes time. I don't know if I'm answering the question as succinctly as possible, but nothing is ever lost. Nothing is ever wasted. And he is not satisfied when he closes his heart. He's empty and he's hungry. He's starving. Mm-hmm. And so we have to do something when we're starving, mm-hmm. when we're desperate. And desperation is what brought me. I started at 16, so that's 60 years I've been on this healing path. Mm-hmm. And I will continue, and I may come back.
Yeah.
For my love of humanity.
You know, it's really interesting. You mentioned just there a question of if you were answering the question, and yes, I would say you're very succinctly and clearly answering the question. So I appreciate that. And I find it really interesting. I hear that you somehow, are, Sheila Winter Wallace through some, perhaps some connection in Canada, and I'm not quite sure how, but evidently not through this well systems work. And
No.
what I find remarkably um, surprising is your words are so remarkably close to the descriptions, to the sharing that I hear from Sheila and a number of other folks that I've had the pleasure of interviewing from that. It's kind of a school, if you will, that
Mm-hmm.
these women go through workshop experiences together, and there are a number of them, and I've had the opportunity to interview a number of them. And one way or another, the words might not be exactly the same, but they're so very similar to what you were just describing.
Well, I never really went to workshops.
Mm-hmm.
What I did instead is I did silent therapeutic retreats. So this would be 2 weeks, not having any books, TV, radio, you name it. Just the therapist and with nature. And then I progressed to where I hold silent retreats. And I also work in my BC home. I have a lot of oxygen apparatus. I have a hyperbaric chamber. I have an ozone spa. I have oxygen generators and ozone generators and all kind of detoxing
Mm-hmm.
apparatus. Um, However, my heart's desire at this point is to become an inspirational speaker.
Mm-hmm.
Vacate my human shell, as you might say, and become a vessel for higher powers or universal energy of love and light.
Mm-hmm.
So I have been more like a hermit. However, I do believe, and I've felt this, that people around about our age, we've come into humanity as like a wave, waves in the sea. We are flowing onto the beach and being swept out. And I would say that would be partly the explanation of the synchronicity of similar words.
Mm-hmm.
We are bathing in similar energies, and we have similar purposes, but unique ways of expressing this purpose for humanity.
I hear you. I hear you. And I'm curious. I guess there's no time like the present. Um, I'd be happy to invite you to take this conversation to whatever level you might like. If this were a far larger audience than my modest little Poetry of Predicament podcast audience, and if you had the opportunity to introduce yourself and to unfold a bit of what you've learned, what you've gleaned in your years of being alive, what your experience has brought you that you'd like to share with folks who might not have had the benefit of your years, of your travel, of your intention, your self-healing. You've done a tremendous amount in your life. You bring a tremendous amount of wisdom with you, and you have some desire to share that.
Oh, yes.
So, and if this were a larger audience, and if this were you stepping up to the podium, so to speak, how would you like to let us know about your world and what you'd like to share?
I would love to be able to ignite a flame that might need to have a little bit more boost of energy into an awareness that their greatest challenges, whatever they may be in any of our careers, relationships, health, financial situation, communities, that their greatest difficulties, challenges are where their greatest gifts are. If they have the passion, anger is passion. So I'd love to tell them that grab that anger, love that anger, and ask that anger, what is the deepest expression? What is the deepest lack? What is the deepest desire of having somebody listen to that and know that everything we do, every word we say is always about us. It's not about the other person. Until we learn to let go of our story and we learn to love ourselves, and there's many ways. I'd love to spend time talking about how to love yourself. I'd love to spend time about your body being your greatest gift, and in my opinion, it is your earthly laboratory. It's there in every second of the day to give you immediate feedback, be your guidance. I'd love to tell them that they have no idea of the abilities, the greatness to make themselves full of joy, of happiness, and abundance. It's their birthright.
Got it. You mentioned that you'd like to say more about the importance of loving ourselves. Can you unfold that a bit for us?
Going back ancestrally, going back to communities, there has been a need for the community's survival to keep the community under traditional ways of doing things, which has at the extreme is a form of control. And the way we control is by living in a negative, self-deprivating environment. So ancestrally, we don't have the most compassionate caregivers. And we have the perfect parents for us, for our soul's journey. And until we connect with our soul, it's pretty difficult to understand that concept. And of course, our parents change over time. Only I lost my parents as a teenager with no relatives around. So that was my gift from a soul level. So I think I've lost the train.
Well, I'm particularly curious. You were mentioning about the importance of loving ourselves, and I'm curious if you have any coaching or suggestions or sharing
Yes.
that you'd like to do about that.
Well, I do retreats, and in one of the things that's very beneficial is we create mandalas of our belief systems. That's where you have to begin to see yourself. And then you look at the negative chitter-chatter that goes through your mind, and then you look at the opposite. And so on the mandala, you write down, I'm not worthy. And then on the opposite stroke of the mandala, you say, I am the greatest person to be worthy. And it begins to ask you to become your own master. You begin to choose. As a child, you did not choose the environment as a human being. But as a human being, it is your responsibility to develop your highest potential. And you are losing energy when you keep these mental vibrations of self-doubt, weakening your inner being. So the other thing is, when it really comes down to it, the greatest teacher is yourself, even though a therapist is there to support you. And in the beginning, you do tend to place your trust with another person because you have destroyed this trust in yourself by keep repeating that you are no good in whatever words they are, in whatever field they are. And so you borrow the ability to trust with another human being. In the old days, it might have been a friend. Today, we call it therapists, counselors, or coaches. And then in time, you begin to say, oh, intuitively, I think I'm saying this better than my therapist. So you move and you bring that ability that you've trained yourself in trust back into your own mental thinking. And you do the same with the words, you do the same with energy, because we're constantly exchanging energy every second of the day. And that's why nature is so wonderful. And I'm blessed in living in two different nature places, one here in Fiji on an island off the grid, and the other in the country in BC in the Okanagan. So Fiji is feminine energy and BC is masculine energy. I get to do that. I happen to be a world traveler. So loving yourself is expanding, is opening your eyebrows physically, opening your ears physically, opening yourself to life, opening your chest, opening your hips, connecting with your feet. It's watching children. It's learning how to become spontaneous. So loving yourself is creating the best way you know how to express yourself. Like people who are athletics, when they're in what we call the zone, and they are entering into a little bit of a trance, the true self. Artists are the same, musicians are the same. We deny ourselves these possibilities when we keep repeating the programming we received as children from our caregivers. I'm getting up every day and loving myself more and more, partly because nature is so accepting. Nature doesn't criticize. Nature just is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It accepts the decay for fertilizing the future. She has her rough moments of volcanic explosions, but that's going to fertilize a new valley one day and a new civilization. Nothing is wasted.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I hear that you have set yourself up in a pretty wonderful way. You spend your time divided between being in BC in Canada and then in Fiji. And I'm curious if someone wanted to contact you about, well, you've talked about a number of things now, poetry and some of your artwork, and also evidently you got your space set up with some remarkable tools and facility there in BC. And I'm curious if somebody wanted to chat with you some more, connect with you about some of the things you're talking about. Is there a good way that people could reach out to connect with you?
The best way is my email is Anne with an E, and my last name is Denada, Denada. If they at iCloud.com. If they can't well, just remember iCloud.com. And if they can't remember that, they can remember Whispers of Grace. Then go on Amazon and you'll see my name at iCloud.com. I do have a website. It's a very, very old one. I'm in the process of having 2 more made. And it is www.travel and the initials AD, my initials AD, and my deceased husband's PV at .com, sorry, adpv.com / capital A Anne, ANNE. So that's a very old website, but it does have a little bit about my retreat, my poetry, my artwork.
I really appreciate being able to connect with you. You've got such a very, very different world and living arrangement set up than I do. And
I have the accommodation. You are free to come.
Oh, thank you so much.
I'll show you pictures. I'll turn the computer around and show you my daily view.
Okay. You know, it's such an extraordinary thing to have heard about places like Fiji, and I've done some travel in my life, but I've never been to that remote and extraordinary part of particularly my favorite ocean space in the world, the Pacific Ocean and beyond is just so dear to me, and I'm really enjoying your descriptions and your sharing of what life is like a bit there. It's good to know that people have a way to connect with you. And it sounds like some part of the year might be able to connect with you in Canada and some part of the year in Fiji. And it also sounds like we might hear more and more from you as you start to step up into some sort of public speaking, some sort of finding ways to get your message out in this world. Yeah.
May I be a little minute teacher for you, Dean?
Sure.
You said you love the Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
And how to love yourself was a question.
Mm-hmm.
And you accept what you said and you allow your heart and your soul to make that happen for you.
Mm-hmm.
You have an invitation. We get many invitations, but we are required to slow down and let them sink in.
Mm-hmm. Duly noted.
You on the spot.
Thank you.
The universe will create it if you allow your heart to open with it. I promise you.
Mm. Mm.
It's a beautiful place to write poetry.
Sweet. Very sweet. Well, you mentioned something about maybe turning your computer around to give us a little view. Would you mind?
Oh, no, I will do that right now. And you'll see my beach. I hope the sun comes up early in the morning. And I need a bit of guidance. Can you see?
Oh, yeah.
Too high, too low?
Oh, it's looking just wonderful.
I have the best garden on the can you see down there?
Yes.
Is in. We
Yes.
do get there. And I have a top house. But I've spent the last 3 years building. You have to be reasonably fit. Am I going too fast?
That's just fine.
Okay, I do have stairs, but they're very small stairs.
Yeah.
I changed my shoes to go out off the deck, so that's what I'm doing.
Okay.
So,
Well, it is absolutely beautiful. I so appreciate you sharing it with us.
it doesn't belong to me. We
Uh-huh.
are just gatekeepers. This is
Mhm.
Mother Nature. This is her
Mhm.
home. Okay?
Yeah.
But the amount of flowers and colors is just fantastic. And I'm in the process of getting a greenhouse built, and I want to become self-sufficient. And
Mm.
my son is going to inherit this. Lucky him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know, but there's a couple of my art pieces. Yes. I don't know, the light's not too good here.
Oh, it's visible.
And there's another one. There you go. If you can see them.
I can. Yeah.
And there's another one. So surround yourself with color. Color feeds the soul. And
Mm.
that's what nature is about. Nature is about color. Our soul eats color.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, and Denada, it's been a pleasure to meet you.
thank you,
Uh,
Dick.
I have to say there are a number of pieces of this whole interview experience that are new to me and delightfully new to me, including being toured around uh, uh, an island residence. Completely delightful.
Thank you.
I wish you so well, and I so appreciate your uh, sincerity and depth of heart in your message. It comes through loud and clear. And I want you to know I send you my warmest blessings, and I thank you so much for your invitation and for your warmth in this time together.
Well, I appreciate. Now, do you have your website on your email?
I do. Each of my emails, you'll see a signature, and that includes the information about the podcast that I was mentioning, which is a
Yes.
YouTube channel. You'll find that in YouTube. And then you'll also see the address of the website as well.
Good. I will go visit it. I will now that I've met you and resonated with you,
Mm-hmm.
I'll take the next step. Thank you, Dean.
All righty. And you take good care of yourself.
You too. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.